Well, I tell you what, living in a cave for the last few months has been really boring, but I'm ready to come back and see what PC gaming has got for me this time. Greetings and salutations, my beautiful people. Wait, that's not my intro. No, but really. I know that The Last of Us Part 2 has been released recently, and I do plan to cover it, but I'm going to wait for some of the craziness to sort of die down a little bit before we talk about it, so this time let's talk about something else.
There was this amazing moment in Greedfall where, during a loyalty quest, I had to reload a specific part of the quest about 4 times and experiment by running up and down a hillside before it triggered the next phase of the quest. This woman right here, looking all sassy, was supposed to attack me after a successful charisma check, but instead she would glitch out and just kinda stand there staring at me, causing the quest to not update correctly and preventing me from talking to the NPC I'd just saved. Eventually I managed to trigger her attack animation by running far enough away to disengage from some kind of invisible combat phase, and when I returned to her she started swinging her sword in my general vicinity. And I laughed, she laughed, we all laughed, even when I swung my Final Fantasy sword at her face. It was a fun time, all around. The reason I bring this up is because I'd heard a lot of terrible things about this game, glitches and bugs and broken quests and all sorts of horrible problems back when it was first released in September last year. It has an average score of 72 on Metacritic, which isn't bad, to be fair. But my primary source of news on this game's state when it launched 9 months ago is from SkillUp's video, which I'll link in the description. I both heard and knew very little about this game pre-launch, but according to SkillUp there was a fair amount of hype surrounding Greedfall, which wound up in a lot of disappointed people, and I can't speak to this because I saw literally one trailer which sold me on its setting and the promise of a beefy new RPG to play. But when I heard that the game was broken at launch, I chose to hold off until it was on sale. And it seems like it was worth it, to be honest, because as I said, my little story from the start has a purpose, and that purpose is this. That was by far the worst glitch I had in this game. To hear others talk about it back when it was first released, I was expecting far worse from Greedfall, but it seems like great effort has been made by the developer French studio Spiders, creators of Bound by Flame and Technomancer, to polish up the game post-launch. Nowadays it looks gorgeous, runs beautifully, and I can count on one hand the number of times I've had frame drops on the PS4 Pro. I had one moment where I genuinely thought the game was going to crash, but it picked itself up, dusted down its trousers and carried on as if nothing had happened. And don't get me wrong, there are still a few niggling issues with Greedfall. There are invisible walls everywhere, which makes exploration a little bit cumbersome sometimes. The writing can be hit or miss. The lip sync is interesting.
Halt! Your names, titles, and business at hand.
Sir de Sardet, emissary of the Congregation of Merchants on Tier Fredi. I have come to present my regards to your governor.
Your papers seem to be in order. Welcome to Hikmet, Your Excellency.
Enemies can sometimes either see you from all the way across the map or not see you when you literally have your sword up their rear. Sometimes quests will just abruptly end with no apparent resolution, although this usually happens when there's a second stage that needs some time or progression in the main story before it'll pop up. Oftentimes loyalty quests with your companions. But these issues are no worse than those that we've seen in many other large-scale open-world RPGs in the last decade, and they pale in comparison to many of the game's excellent aspects. I never hit anything game-breaking over the course of 30 hours. With Spiders being a small, largely independent studio, I expected a hell of a lot worse, so to say I was pleasantly surprised is an understatement. Let's stop talking about the negative, because there's already a lot of that out there. Let's talk about the positive instead, shall we? If you're unfamiliar with Greedfall, it is a 17th century styled open-world RPG set in a universe that is suffering from an ailment called the Malachor. You play a young nobleman or woman who leaves their home city behind, alongside their cousin, Constantine, in search of a cure on a mysterious new island. Your country has begun to colonise this island, warring with the locals and forging shaky alliances with other factions who have set up their own cities in the New World, and your cousin has been made the governor of New Serene. As the legate of the Merchants' Congregation, your job is basically to do your cousin's political bidding, forge relationships with the natives and your allies, build your relations and reputation with the warring factions, and make difficult choices, all in aid of creating a budding new settlement. as well as search for a cure to the Malachor. In terms of looks, Greedfall is a beautiful game, although the repetitiveness of certain environments can make traversing the world feel a bit samey after a while. Even so, for a small studio with their own proprietary engine, this is a gorgeous world that for me was easy to sink into and enjoy. I loved exploring every inch of the map, finding new and stupid ways to traverse the cities, and though many of the interiors and particularly many of the natives' villages are essentially copy-pasted, it never feels as lazy or restrictive as something like Dragon Age 2 does. That said, due to the janky lip sync, facial animations can look a bit off sometimes, and since you'll be spending an awful lot of time in conversation cutscenes, it's probably best to avert your eyes every time someone starts speaking. Otherwise the game will look like a dodgy dubbed anime. What really makes the game stand out is its versatile, incredibly well-crafted RPG elements. At the start of the game you'll be given a selection of points that can be used to unlock one skill, one attribute and one talent. And the effect this decision has on the game world is tangible right from the off. You can focus on charisma and try to charm your way into and out of various situations, be a monstrous scoundrel and stab everyone who gets in your way, although this will gain you the ire of many of your companions. Focus on stealth in the form of intuition and vigour, both of which will give you access to alternative routes of progression through areas, such as an otherwise difficult to navigate wall or pathway, precarious beams and jumps. Due to how well fleshed out each of these attributes are, and how there's only a limited quantity of both attribute and talent points, you're encouraged to focus on a small number of them rather than attempting to branch out into all pathways. For example, you could put 1 point into every talent, charisma, vigour and so on, to try to cover all your bases, but this will leave you thin on the ground in other areas, as multiple alternate pathways require 2 or 3 levels in the appropriate talent or attribute to be unlocked. Similarly, there are different attributes for weapons, with heavy, two-handed weapons focusing on strength, accuracy reserved for the more powerful guns, and so on. It's also advisable to put at least 1 point into craftsmanship, as every weapon and every piece of armour, with the exception of hats, has at least one socket in it, into which you can craft additional pommels, pauldrons, and much more. These upgrades will give you various stat boosts depending on which piece you craft, with several of the pieces also having the option to boost one of your attributes, so if you like, you can chop and change your armour on the fly to temporarily add a much needed vigour or charisma point. Given that crafting upgrades are easy to get hold of just by going out and stabbing things, you may as well devote a little time to crafting before you start to drown in chunks of unrefined iron ore. And if you don't care about the stat upgrades, you can just add upgrades to your armour to pimp it out a little, since each piece is unique in appearance. Even if you end up changing the upgrade you're using at any given time, you also have a good chance of reclaiming the materials you used when you remove the item, so not all is wasted. There's also the ability to craft traps, although I never bothered with this because I've always hated using traps in these kind of games. That's just a personal preference though. You can build upon your character's inherent magical talents, or just go pedal to the metal with blunt force weapons for a slow but incredibly heavy hitting build. The only thing I would say is that it isn't worth relying purely on guns, as they fire quite slowly and ammo is limited. So unless you can min-max to the point of one-hitting every enemy you see, it's always best to have a good old-fashioned sword to hand. In terms of combat, at the start of the game it can feel extremely repetitive and tedious. You'll often be fighting the same enemies over and over again, and even in the late game the generic enemies dotted around the world don't really change up all that much. Once you start unlocking more skills, building up your weapon portfolio or trying out new spells, the fights become much more frantic and fun, and you will start to see much larger, harder hitting creatures with lovely greasy tentacles, who all look like they've been conjured straight from the earth beneath your feet. These creatures aren't just random denizens either, they're given an in-game explanation with their worth and the reverence the natives have for them, venerated often throughout the campaign. Many of these creatures are also tied to a background quest that you're given fairly early on, with you uncovering various notes left behind by a professor who was studying the creatures and their importance on the island. So seeking them out is a charming way of reading the silly sod's notes just to see how lacking his sense of self-preservation is, if nothing else. Aside from that, the building-sized beasts with their enormous health bars and large quantities of armour, which in any enemy in the game must be destroyed first through heavy hitting or blunt force attacks before you can deal much in the way of real damage, were giving me some serious Dragon's Dogma vibes, and I love Dragon's Dogma. In terms of the game's writing and overall plot, I'd say that the side quests are often far more enjoyable than the main quests, although the way that your reputation and choices actually affect the conversations you can have or the approaches you can take is fantastic to see. Maintaining a good reputation with various factions opens up a hell of a lot of avenues for progressing through future quests, but there is always a lingering sense of dread as you realise that you can't continue to play all sides forever, and sooner or later you will have to make a choice. It's a shame that your character, Desarde, never feels like he has much personality, although he does very much enjoy introducing himself in the exact same way to every single character you meet. But I was easily able to look past this, as the world, its background, its lore, and the rest of the characters more than make up for your champion's somewhat stale approach to things. Much like in Dragon Age, your companions will also have a tangible effect on quests, on conversations, and will either freely interrupt or offer you the chance to let them speak during certain discussions to steer the conversation in your favour. On the other hand, bringing certain companions with you can also backfire, such as taking a native into a heavily xenophobic city. It certainly helps matters that the voice acting is, for the most part, pretty well done, with a charming variety of local English accents flavouring the colonists, whilst the natives have this interesting Central European Irish sounding accent.
I wanted to make sure that everything was fine.
I think so. I managed to retrieve the tablets discreetly.
I am glad to hear that you managed to retrieve them. I will go talk.
Desarde might be bland as butter, but the world itself more than compensates for his drab affectations. The plot itself is heavily stacked on top of a wealth of political intrigue and dodgy dealings, so if you're not interested in a political style of story writing, you're not likely to be at home here. Many of the quests that you're given, especially in the opening hours, lean heavily on ensuring that you try to maintain a peaceful relationship with all factions, and the ramifications of your actions, particularly later on, become especially evident. It's great to see a game that doesn't even tout your actions having consequences actually bother to integrate your reputation and actions into its world and characters in a concrete way. Beyond the occasional bug and the distractingly bad lip sync though, I really don't have many points of contention with Greedfall. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable romp after months spent playing next to nothing but The Binding of Isaac constantly, because I'm a masochist apparently, and I'm glad I picked it up. One thing I will say, which will definitely echo skill-up sentiments on the game, is that this is an excellent groundwork for a sequel. Much like Watch Dogs and Assassin's Creed, the Foundation is here to create an absolutely stunning follow-up, and I wholeheartedly hope that Spiders are given the opportunity to do so. Fix up the lip sync, spruce up the enemy variety, and add a little more variation to the world and your biomes, and you will have one hell of a sequel. Until then, I'm pretty content with what's on offer in Greedfall, and I look forward to seeing what Spiders produce in the future. So, to answer the question posited in the beginning of why didn't I play this sooner, I'm going to say it's because of this. I was massively put off by the complaints around its technical performance and writing, and was worried it wasn't worth the price of admission. However, the last 9 months have clearly been spent tidying up this game, cleaning up many of the bugs and broken quests that I'd heard about. And whilst the game still isn't a complete technical marvel, it's certainly far better than I could ever have expected. I feel like Greedfall might have been a bit hard done by, and I would seriously urge anyone with a fondness for RPGs to give this game just a little bit of your time. If you want something new, something a bit different, or even something a bit silly to sink your teeth into, you should absolutely give Greedfall a shot. I certainly wasn't disappointed.